Glad to get you going here. If you want to grab a seat, Karin McCullough has been gracious enough to agree to play for us this evening. And I'm going to pass her the mic and go check in the hallway and have some nice music.
Thank you, Ryan. Did you say courageous enough?
Courageous, but also courageous.
I think courageous is probably the word to play in front of you folks. So given that October is our Halloween month, and my favorite key is G minor, and one of our members, Katie O'Rourke, during the state music conference this summer, said, Karin, you want to play rock on and off, but your hands are too small for octave passages. So you know, his opus 33 in G minor, A2 tableau. And it doesn't have any octave passages, so you don't have to leave out any notes, although I do have to roll a few chords.
Thank you, thank you. Well, thank you very much for your courage. I guess thank you, Katie O'Rourke, for making that suggestion. Boy, that was sure a nice way to wake up. Welcome, everybody. We have a couple things to take care of. And first and foremost, I'm going to invite any announcements from the audience or anybody in it. Please, Karin. Back into the breach.
Okay, this is probably a good place. Do you Do you have any adult piano students or flute students or violin?
And I think we are now at the point where we're about to invite our esteemed presenter. So you'll have to forgive me, I am going to read a rather lengthy but pretty engaging bio from my phone. It's a recent acquisition, I apologize. But we are lucky enough today to have Laura Dean join us, and she is a pianist, music educator, and I believe recently an author. Laura Dean's dynamic music career spans over 25 years and includes audiences in the United States, Europe, and Mexico. And she's originally from Montana, though, of course, she lives now in Seattle, Washington. She performs, teaches, adjudicates, writes, and offers private and public concerts, along with school and community residencies and music education workshops. She thrives on travel to both domestic and international destinations where she collects stories, photographs, videos, and music which inspire and inform her solo performance programs, writing, and educational residencies. Her educational outreach for K through 12 includes a variety of experiential learning opportunities, such as teaching the folk songs of Mexico and the dances of Cuba. Aiming for maximum engagement, Laura's solo programs and residencies weave together live music, played on the piano and guitar, vocal selections, engaging narratives, and captivating photographs. As an experienced grant writer, Laura has received numerous grants for her work as an educator, performer, and research scholar from local and national organizations. Her first book, which she'll be presenting on today, Music of the Westward Expansion, Songs of Heart and Place on the American Frontier, was published in May of 2022. Laura created Hear It, Sing It, Move It, a North American folk song collection. It's a complete curriculum, including Songbook Teacher's Curriculum Guide, and recordings in 2018. In 2018, Romanza de Amor, her first solo recording, released on Yellow House Records, features a selection of piano works from Mexico's most beloved composer, Manuel N. Ponce. Moved with a Past, released on Yellow House Records.
Women.
Sorry. Women with a Past, I was doing so well. Women with a Past, released on Yellow House Records in 2015, features piano works from 5 women composers from the Baroque through the 20th century. For more information on Laura and her musical projects, please visit her website, lauramusic.biz. And hopefully that is enough of an aperitif to get you all excited. Laura, please.
Thank you, Ryan. Your voice is so soothing and lovely. It's just wonderful.
Better than one.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to try without the mic, and we'll see how it goes. A second. Get ready. As I walked out in the streets of Laredo, as I walked out in Laredo one day, I spied a young cowboy all dressed in white linen, all dressed in white linen, as cold as the clay. Oh, beat the drum slowly and play the fife lowly. Play the death march as you carry me along. Take me to the green valley and lay the sod o'er me. For I'm a young cowboy, I know I've done wrong. That is the Cowboys' Lament, or Streets of Laredo, as you might recognize it. And it's taken from an Irish folk tune from the 1700s. The Cowboys is one of the chapters in my book that we are going to talk about today. And beyond the streets of Laredo, you may not know some facts about the Cowboys, who were in the West in about the 1860s to the 1870s, driving herds of longhorn cattle from the north of Texas up to Wyoming and Montana for shipping back east. Music was very important to the cowboy way of life. The songs, the soothing lullabies, tender love songs, and hymns actually soothed the cattle along the way and kept the cattle from stampeding. So it was often that a cowboy was hired into an outfit based on how well he could sing. Now, in the night, when the cattle were bedded down, two cowboys took turns, or a pair of two cowboys would work the perimeter of the cattle. And one would sing a verse and the other would answer. One would sing and one would answer. And they went on like that for 2 hours sometimes, and then another pair would take their place. So it was a form of creativity for them on the open plains, and it was a way for them to document their history in the oral tradition. And so that is the story of the cowboys. And what you may not know is that 1 in 4 cowboys was Black. I certainly didn't learn that in my high school history or college history classes. Many of the freed slaves came out west to start a new life. And because many of those men had worked in agriculture, they were perfect as cowboys. And so the vision of the white cowboy on a horse isn't exactly true, because there were Black cowboys, Hispanic cowboys, and indigenous cowboys on the trail. And sometimes there were girls dressed up as cowboys. I have a story about a young lady who wanted the adventure of a cowboy. She was a very slight woman, and she got the cowboy gear, and she got hired onto an outfit with the cowboys. And it was a couple of weeks before she came out of her tent in a dress. Well, you can imagine the surprise of the trail boss and the crew. But she, after that time, decided to go back on the next train to Texas. So I'm from Montana, and this is my book that I wrote, Music in the Westward Expansion, Songs of Heart and Place on the American Frontier. It was published by McFarland Publishing in 2022. People ask me how long it took to write the book. The short answer is 7 years. The long answer is it was my whole life, because so much of my life of growing up in the West is included in this book. I want to open with the introduction to the book, and that will kind of give you a sense of what music and the West has meant to me and growing up in a small rural community. On a sunny April morning in 1981, my dad drove me from our house down Airport Road to the Choteau High School parking lot, where I would catch the bus for a multi-school concert band festival, which would be held in Conrad, a neighboring community. Both Conrad and Choteau are rural communities located along the eastern side of the Rocky Mountain front, wide open country where the plains dramatically meet the mountains. Our middle school band had been preparing for months. I loved playing my French horn, and I couldn't wait to get to the festival. When my dad pulled into the parking lot of the school, my friends were waiting on the sidewalk along a collection of music stands and instruments. Excited to get on with the day of music, I leaned over, kissed my dad on the cheek, hopped down from the seat of his vintage Ford pickup, and slammed the door shut. The only way to close the door of an old Ford. As my dad slowly pulled away, he casually waved goodbye out of his open window. And that was the last time I saw my dad. I was in Conrad playing my French horn in the evening concert. He died on a head-on collision on the Augusta Highway, a few miles out of Choteau. In my mind's eye, he was forever young, handsome, and my hero. His sudden death was the worst event of my life and in the life of my family. Our small community of Choteau was stunned and deeply saddened. My dad was the football coach, a beloved teacher, husband, and father. School was closed on the day of his memorial service. Students and community members, family and friends gathered in the auditorium to celebrate his life and to collectively mourn. Music provided comfort in my time of need, just as many of the people that came out west in the 1800s found comfort in music in the throes of their physically and emotionally difficult journeys westward. Many of them suffered the loss of family and friends along the way. So this book takes a look at the Westward Expansion through the lens of music. It starts with the Northern Cheyenne courtship flute, goes to the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Oregon Trail, early frontier communities, the cowboys, and then finally it talks about how music in the 20th century and composers have been inspired by the music of the Old West, and they continue to be inspired today. So today I'm going to just give you some snippets from this book, which is a 200-page book with 4 indexes, a robust bibliography. There's 40 photographs, and this will just give you a little taste today of what it's all about. The reason I wrote the book was twofold. One was to take a look at the Westward Expansion through this lens of music and celebrate people that we don't normally think about when we think of the American West. And the second was to encourage people to add musical experiences into their lives. Well, here I'm preaching to the choir, so we already are adding experiences into people's lives. The book grew actually out of a residency that, a musical residency that the C.M. Russell Museum in Montana sponsored. C.M. Russell was an artist of the Old West that drew pictures of Indians, cowboys, settlers, and his work is very well known. There's a beautiful museum. They hired me to come out and give concerts in the schools and then a concert at the museum. And it was going to be featuring music of the West. And that's how the first research of this book happened. That was in 2016. So in 2016, I really wanted to meet somebody that carried the old tradition with them that was Native American. When I was 3, 4, and 5, my dad's first job was on an Indian reservation in eastern Montana. We were the only white family. I went to school and I was the only, I went to school to kindergarten and to first grade there. My earliest memory, musical experience that I still remember was in kindergarten when I attended a powwow. And so that was way back in the early 70s. And so I think that in all these years, that has kind of been part of my makeup. And so I went to find a voice, and I came across Jay Oldmouse, who had been inducted into a Hall of Fame for master craftsman in Montana. He didn't have a website, as you can imagine. He said that I found him by the Moccasin telegram. So I connected with him, and he was the flute maker for the Northern Cheyenne tribe, which is in kind of eastern Montana, south central Montana more, in Busby, Montana. And I drove out there after flying to Billings and spent the day with him. And I have to tell you, it was the most magnificent day I have ever, of music I've spent, because it was just music from the heart. In his trunk, he had the tradition of the Northern Cheyenne courtship flute and photographs going back to the 1800s. And he let me touch those instruments, he let me play those instruments, and he taught me about the flute and his ancestors. He built this flute for me. Jay Oldmouse was only a couple years older than me, despite his name, and he was a character larger than life. He was also very involved in the community. He was the town crier, which meant he went around and made announcements out of his pickup with big speakers on the side. when people needed to hear important information. His flute craftsmanship and playing was well known throughout his tribe. He was often asked to play for weddings, funerals, and social events. But the original history of the flute went back to John Turkey Legs of the late 1800s. Then it was passed to Grover Wolf Voice. Then it was passed to Black Bear, who was Jay's grandfather, and then it was passed to Jay. So you can see how special this tradition is. All of those different people taught the next generation how to build the flute and how to play the flute. It's an instrument of love. Back in the old days, when a young man wanted to meet the woman of his dreams, he would go to the flute maker, and he would trade hides, tools, beads, whatever he had to the flute maker, and the flute maker would build him a flute. And then the young man would get the flute, and he would go behind the camp in the evening when everybody was done for the work for the day, and he would play from his heart what he felt to woo the woman of his dreams. And if the woman found the music to be attractive, she would go to that young man and they would start talking and their love would grow from there. So that is the story of the Northern Cheyenne courtship flute. And it's one part of the musical tradition of the Northern Cheyenne tribe, who has many different societies. The Dog Society, the Wolf Society, which were all kind of from back in the day when they were fighting. And all of these secret societies had their own songs for religious purposes, for going into battle, for coming back from battle. So it's just an example of one tribe and their rich, rich musical history. At the time of the Westward Expansion, in the early 1800s, there was some 540 tribal nations estimated. So you can imagine each one of those nations had their own musical traditions. And I just find that so fascinating. One thing I want to share with you after playing this flute is a song that was a mixture of European art music, of all things, and the music of John Turkey Legs, who was the person I was telling you about in the 1800s, who Jay had a photograph of in his traditional outfit. That was his clothes, that's what he wore. And he was in Lame Deer, Montana, and a musicologist named Thurlow Lyurance went out to Montana and recorded John Turkey Legs playing the flute and on a wax cylinder recording. And that recording is in the Historic Society in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I was able to share that recording, which is really, really a bad recording, with Jay. Thurlow Lyurance took the recording and he made a composition called Indian Flute Call and Love Song, which was a style of music in the late 1800s and 1900s by composers who called themselves Indianists. So they used melodies and they repurposed them in European style art music. The note to this music, this sheet music, which is from the Lincoln City Libraries, says this melody and flute call was recorded on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation near Lame Deer, Montana, April 2nd, 1912 at the Trader's store. The melody was played into a photograph which recorded it exactly as the flutist John Turkey Legs played it. I think the music is beautiful. It's a style of music that's part of our musical history. And in the latest edition of AMT, American Music Teacher, is an article about current Indigenous composers. And I encourage you to read that article too, and perhaps learn some of that music, or have your students learn some of that music. Well, this story of the Westward Expansion is just rife with sadness, and I have to tell you that during the pandemic, Jay and I were going back and forth over FaceTime and everything, and finalizing his chapter in the book, and he died from COVID. So it's just, yeah, really horrible. And I don't know who is taking over his tradition of the flute. They're kind of tight-lipped about it, but I have a feeling that there's somebody who will step up and carry on the tradition. The next chapter that I want to talk about is about the Lewis and Clark expedition. Now, do you remember anything about the Lewis and Clark expedition? Anybody from school? A little bit. Okay. It was the first expedition out west. It was launched by Thomas Jefferson after the Louisiana Purchase for $15 million or something out west, this huge expanse of land. And at the time, people thought that out west was woolly mammoths, dinosaurs. They thought there was the waterway that was going to carry them all the way to the Pacific, and thus economic prosperity for the United States. So Thomas Jefferson put Meriwether Lewis and William Clark in charge of this expedition, leading 40 strapping men, 19, 20 years old, out west, up the Missouri River, and no problem. They thought it would just keep going. Well, it didn't keep going. After going up the Missouri River and spending the winter with the Mandan, who told them, there's no river that goes all the way. There's the Rocky Mountains. So, spoiler alert, they had to carry everything over the Rocky Mountains, and then they finally got to the Pacific via the Columbia River. But during their time, they met many indigenous nations and tribes along the way. And I was just delighted and surprised to find that music was mentioned in over 100 of their journal entries. They had, as I mentioned, 40 men, and they traveled in these canoes that were very small, and they chose to take along 2 fiddles. Their lead boatman was Pierre Crousset, who was part Omaha Indian and part French. His father was French, his mother was an Omaha Indian. He had one eye, he was a little wiry guy, and he was really wonderful as a boatman, and he was a fiddler. And he kept the men entertained, and he also was used in diplomatic purposes. For when they met tribes along the way and things might have been going a little bit bad. For example, when they met the Shoshone Indians and they needed their horses to get over the mountains, what did they do? Let's have some music. So they fired up the music. There's 3 things I think that helped mainly for the Lewis and Clark expedition, which in all took 3 years and was 4,000 miles. They didn't lose one person, except one person to appendicitis. But I think it was music, number one, that helped buoy the spirits of the men to keep going. They ate 11 pounds of meat a day per person because they were doing that much work. Because music helped as a diplomatic tool. And then there was Sacagawea, who you might have heard of. They met Sacagawea when they were in the Dakotas with the Mandan Indians, but she wasn't Mandan, she was Shoshone. She was captured by the Mandan and brought to them, and then she was sold off in a poker game or gambling game to Toussaint Charbonneau, who was going to be their interpreter, Lewis and Clark. He was not good, but they took Sacagawea and Charbonneau together as a package when they made their way from the Dakotas on with the rest of their trip. She was 16 years old. She had just given birth to a baby. So she was 16 with a baby, traveling with these 40 plus men. And she acted as interpreter, nature guide. Because she was female, she really helped kind of also be diplomatic to some of the tribes along the way. And there's no record of her music, what she sang. There was one black man along the expedition, and the Indians, by accounts of the journals, were very impressed with this man. They tried to rub the black off, they wanted him to dance. It was, quite a novelty. But in these 100 journal entries about music, do you think they would have mentioned one song that they did, or sang, or performed? No, not one mention of a song, unfortunately. And even on their way back home, on the return trip, this was when they were in what's Oregon and Eastern Washington border on the east. On a return trip, a profound story of music and friendship between the Corps and the Walla Wallas is mentioned in the journals. Chief Yellow Pit of the Walulas threw a big party in honor of the Corps of Discovery and asked neighboring Yakimas to come. So this was a huge party, hundreds of people. On this festive occasion, Chief Yellow Pit asked the men of the Corps to trade medicine songs with his people. This is a huge ask. A medicine song is something that they're going to sing to give the people, the men, very big power and keep them safe. When a medicine song is given away, there is powerful medicine gifted to the recipient of that song. This was not only an exchange of songs, but an exchange of friendship. The men of the Corps obliged by singing 2 songs, and the Indians sang 1. More than any other story of music in the journals, this one invites the question, what songs did they choose? What medicine songs did the Walla Walla sound like? Sadly, we'll never know. All right, so I said there were 3 things that got the Corps through. One was music, one was Sacagawea, the other was whiskey. They took a lot of whiskey and they drank it liberally. For, I think, pain relief, and also, I think, for all these parties. So there's scholars that have speculated on what songs might have been, in their repertoire. But this one, I think, is fitting. This is a fiddle tune called Whiskey Before Breakfast that I've arranged for the piano. I'll just play a little bit of it so you get the idea. I East Coast. Then the next people that went to the West that they had kind of explored and laid the groundwork for were fur trappers and more explorers like Zebulon Pike and missionaries. Well, missionaries thought all of these Indians need to be saved. Well, they've been in the West for 10,000 years, some 10,000 years. But the missionaries were very set on going out west and saving the souls of the Indians, and also having them adopt an agricultural style of life. And two of the missionaries that are probably the most known are Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. They were the first to come out west. Narcissa Whitman was the first white woman to come out west. She rode out west side saddle, the 2,000 miles, walking side saddle in the ladylike way. She got married on the evening before she departed to the west, and her family cried into their handkerchiefs because they knew, they had this sense they would never see her again, and indeed they never did see her again. Marcus and Narcissa set up a mission in what's now Walla Walla area. They were working with the Cayuse Indians, who were friendly, but they didn't want to be converted to Christianity. They showed up for songs, for singing. And then Narcissa and Marcus later then just turned their attention to helping people along the Oregon Trail, which passed by there. And then there was the horrible massacre where the Cayuse had lost over half of their people to death by disease, and they were just had enough, and there was a big battle at the mission, and Narcissa and Marcus died. But I think it's important to note that many Americans at that time were devout Christians, and that was just a part of everyday life. And so when these missionaries sent letters home, they were telling people, come out west. There's beautiful land, there's great farmland, you can make a new life here, it's clean living, it's healthy living. And so people were really starting to listen to these missionaries. And I have one piece, which I think it just makes me feel like kind of like this old 1800s piece, like what church might have been like at that time. All these missionaries and all of the people in the East sitting in church. It's Wondrous Love, which was, this is from 1835. So, as I mentioned, there was the missionaries, and also there was more explorers that came out. I just want to mention that Zebulon Pike came out with an expedition, and that would later, Pike's Peak in Colorado would be named after him. While he was out west and with his group, they were captured by the Spanish, because Colorado was part of Spain's kind of empire at the time. And they took that crew back to Santa Fe, and Zebulon Pike wrote in his journals about the musical life that he experienced while he was a prisoner in Santa Fe. There were parties that were called fandangos, where there was a mixture of Spanish, Mexican, English, indigenous music, and people would just get together and dance and sing. And fandango was also a style of music that was popular at the time for people to play in their parlors. I'm just, as I said, I'm just going to give you a tiny snippet. So here's a fandango from early 1800s. It's just an example of just the variety of music that was out in the West. And by the way, many of those people that were in Santa Fe went to the fandangos, and the men danced with each other. It was called a stag dance. Women were in short supply. So I have two pictures in my book of men dancing together. One is like some miners dancing together, and one is some cowboys dancing together. They both have the fiddle. You see the two men dancing together. They're called stag dances. One man would put the white scarf around his arm, and they would go about like that because they wanted to dance. It was a part of what they wanted to do. It made them happy, and it was what they were used to in the East before they went out West. So speaking of music in the East, after all of these different groups had tried it out, missionaries, fur trappers, explorers, then came the huge wave of people, and they traveled on the tracks that were literally laid down by the missionaries and the early explorers in what became the Oregon Trail, which could be called the Oregon, California, Bozeman Trail. The Oregon Trail includes everything, except the Santa Fe Trail, which was down south. By the way, the only piano that I have seen that came overland was in a museum in Santa Fe, and it was a very wealthy family that had traveled with 4 or 5 wagons, and they had brought their piano, and they have restored that piano. It's in the museum in Santa Fe. Any middle-class person, upper-class person in the 1800s had a piano in their home. The music they played was popular music of Stephen Foster. They played orchestral arrangements of music. They played folk songs. It was how people entertained themselves. A young lady, of course, of marrying quality would be able to play the piano, and a young man might play the piano, and he would be able to sing. He would be able to sing the right song for the right occasion. Just recall it like that. And sometimes men and women played together beforehand on the piano, which was acceptable for men and women to be sitting next to each other. So music was, a way for people to socialize. I thought that this was interesting that women at that time did not play the violin so much because they thought it would disfigure the face. So these people decided they were going to move west. They were in search of a better life. Conditions in the East were not great. There was disease, there was overcrowding, unsavory food production, unsavory people in the streets of the big cities, walking in mud up to your knees. Young people wanted to make a break from their parents. They wanted their own land, they wanted their own life. So some people gave everything they had. It cost $500 to $1,000 to get outfitted with a wagon that would make it out west. And so they loaded up these wagons with supplies that would last the 6 to 8 months getting out west. They'd kiss their family goodbye. They'd never see their family again. I mean, the passion that these people had, the fire that they had for this craze to go west was, I don't think that we can imagine it today. Would you be willing to put everything into a wagon that's not much bigger than these 2 pianos put together? I don't think I would. But what they did do is they made room for their instruments. They took portable instruments. They took portable keyboard instruments like rocking melodeons. They took harmonicas, flutes, bugles. Bugles are what got the company going every morning, the group. What am I leaving out? They took fiddles, men played fiddles, the women played the guitar. So I'm gonna play a couple of songs for you that were popular on the trail. And I wanna read a couple of quotes about the hardship of the trail, and then what music meant to the people. There was so much sickness and so many deaths. This is Mrs. Gowdy, a direct quote from her journal. The poor cattle, too. They died by the hundreds, starved and overworked. The plains were covered with their carcasses, and the air was polluted with their sickening odor. I wonder how any of us lived through it all. Just thinking of lying with a burning fever in a rough, jolty wagon on a big feather bed put on top of a pile of things all jumbled up with nothing between you and the burning sun but the wagon cover in that smothering dust, with sometimes not a drop of fresh water for 2 days and hardly ever a bit from one camping place to another. And it was often a stagnant pool with nothing to eat but fat, salt bacon, bread, and coffee cooked on a sagebrush or grease wood fire. These people were hardy. In many times the women gave birth right there in the wagon, just rolled on. There was no stopping for giving birth. They died of accidental discharge of firearms, dysentery, dehydration, being run over by a wagon. There was some animal attacks. There were so many things that could go wrong. Some women lost all of their kids and their husband, and then they just had to go on and make a homestead on their own. But to music. After eating a hearty supper, all hands volunteered and hauled up a big pile of logs from our campfire, around which all seated themselves to hear some music. Billy Ressinger was elected leader of the band. Our music consisted of cornet, trumpet, fiddle, and guitar and flute. They played Home Sweet Home and Life on the Ocean Wave. How true are the words of the poet, music hath charms to soothe the savage beast. Yes, how quick the sweet tones will bring back our warmest recollections of some departed loved ones. What a gush of gentle sorrow will spring up in the bosom when we chance to hear some air that a good old mother used to sing at home years ago. Yes, the son never forgets his home. And by the time they got to the journal writing on the Oregon Trail, people were really good at recording what songs they sang. This was a very favorite song called "The Girl I Left Behind Me." I hit the trail in '79, the herd strung out behind me. As I jogged along, my mind ran back to the girl I left behind me. Oh, that sweet little girl, that pretty little girl, that girl you do remind me. That sweet little girl, that dear little girl, the girl I left behind me. The wind did blow and the rain did flow, the hail did fall and blind me. I thought of that girl, that sweet little girl, the girl I left behind me. Oh, that sweet little girl, that pretty little girl, that girl you do remind me. That sweet little girl, that dear little girl, the girl I left behind me. She rode ahead to the place I said I was always glad to find it. She said, I'm true, when you are through, right back here you will find me. Oh, that sweet little girl, that pretty little girl, that girl you do remind me. That sweet little girl, that dear little girl, the girl I left behind me. When we sold out, I took the train. I knew where I would find her. When I got back, we had a big smack, and I ain't no gall darn liar. I want to do one more for you before opening this up to questions. As you can see, there's just so many stories, and it's hard to get to everything. It's also hard to get this borrowed capo off of my guitar. do that. Okay, I'm gonna, let's see. Okay, it'll be rather operatic. It's okay. So have you heard of Mary Maybelle Shirley? Excuse me, Myra Maybelle Shirley. She was a trained classical pianist in a fancy girls' private school in the late 1800s, kind of 1860s. And her family fell on hard times financially, and they moved to Texas, where she married Tom Starr, and she became Belle Starr. So she became an outlaw, or so people thought. But unfortunately, it was more like she was just mixed up with a bunch of outlaws who were running liquor, harboring other outlaws, and she just wasn't good at choosing her partners. And I was really delighted to find, when I was researching cowboy music, that somebody who took down cowboy music at the time had written a song had written down the lyrics to a song that was written by Belle Starr. It's called The Bucking Bronco. And she should have taken her own advice. There was no melody, so I made up a melody to this. And it's also an example of how, through history, stories get bigger and bigger and bigger. So even when I was using primary sources in magazines and letters, I think you just have to take everything with a grain of salt, because people embellish. I mean, I do all the time. Diana Vreeland said, if you can't say something interesting, make something up. But I did make something up for my book. Everything was researched. My love's a wild rider, wild broncos he breaks. He's promised to quit it just for my sake. He ties up one foot, the saddle puts on. With a swing and a jump, he is mounted and gone. The first time I met him was early one spring. He was riding a bronco, a high-headed thing. He tipped me his hat as he gaily did go, for he wished me to look at his bucking bronco. The next time I saw him was late in the fall. He was swinging the girls at the Thomason Ball. He laughed and he talked as we danced to and fro, promised never to ride another bronco. He made me some presents, among them a ring. The return I made him was a far better thing. A young maiden's heart, I'll have you all know. He'd won it by riding his bucking bronco. Now all you young maidens, where'er you reside, beware of the cowboy who swings the rawhide. He'll court you and pet you and leave you and go up the trail in the spring on his bucking bronco. Precautionary tale. This is a love story for all of us, the music educators. This was a love story to my earliest music teachers, who I was so proud to send this book to, some who are not with me anymore, but I got to send it to their families. We make a difference every day in the lives of our students, even though when you're working with that middle school student and they're shrugging their shoulders and, you know, it's like pushing a hippopotamus uphill, we are making a difference. And so this is for you, me, for all of us in the field of music. And now I'll open it up to questions.
I don't have a question right now, but I want to give my condolences for your father.
Thank you. Thank you. I've done this presentation maybe about 15, 18 times. I have not always read the introduction, because it's been hard, but I wanted to read it for friends. And it's important to know what the music that we're teaching means to people. Thank you, Grace. Yeah.
Where can we pick up your book?
Well, I have 3 copies here, or you can buy it on Amazon. They had it at Third Place Books where I did a presentation. I don't think they have it anymore, and it might be faster to get it on Amazon. Or you can order it from McFarland.
I think this is. Me? Oh, okay, so Indianist music, that
Yes.
sounded interesting to me, and the other music. Can we get a copy of that somehow?
Yes, a lot of Arthur Farwell has one song, and I think it's American Music Collection, but also on IMSLP. You can look up the category of Indianists, and it will come up with a huge list. In particular, Arthur Farwell and Charles Wakefield Cadman.
Maybe.
And Amy Beach even had one piece.
I recently read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and at the end of each chapter, there were the lyrics and the melody to a different Indian song, different tribe. And I wonder, do you know of anybody who has set that to music for the piano? I have no idea how to harmonize Indian music.
Yeah, I mean, that you could just make it up, because Natalie Curtis, who was an amazing musicologist, traveled all over the West, as a single woman. She had an Indian chief as her partner, just helping her get between tribes. But she came out with a book that's this thick, the Indian book, and it's still available today, and it has songs transcribed exactly as she transcribed them. So you could just use those songs, or you could make a simple accompaniment, maybe just try you don't have to. I mean, you could just have them be one line, monophonic,
And
as they were.
her name again was?
Natalie Curtis.
Thank you.
And that's the Indian book. And those are all, I have discographies and all of these books listed in here in the back.
I was just gonna say, this is really timely, given the PBS thing about the buffalo that's happening right now.
Yes, I haven't watched that, but I'm excited to. And if you are interested in the West, Ken Burns' The West is amazing. Ken Burns, Lewis and Clark is amazing, and then he's just done a documentary on the buffalo. I mean, Ken Burns could do a documentary on paint peeling and
It's fascinating.
Yeah. But this is really some rich stories. Yeah. And I bet the music's nice in that.
Right, well, it's interesting too, they were talking about every nation had history blankets and stories, and I was thinking they probably have music for all of that too, just we don't know what it is. I mean, I'm imagining that there would be music all the time, like, as you say, waking up in the morning, getting everybody ready to go, come on, we're leaving. And now it's time to.
There were more morning songs, morning, morning songs,
Yeah.
and then children's lullaby songs. So yeah, they were singing to their, especially mothers, to their children all through the day. And then I thought this was interesting about a Cheyenne woman who was still alive when in the 20th century, and she remembered singing to her nephew war songs at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and that would, get him going, but she was there by his side, like, before he marched off.
Wow.
Yeah, her name was Antelope, and I talk about her in here. So it's just, amazing traditions.
Could you explain a little bit more about your childhood in terms of like the part of Montana that you grew up in?
Yes.
Like south mid.
I was born in Billings in eastern Montana,
Okay.
and then my dad got a job when he was finished with college in Poplar, which is on the Indian reservation of the Assiniboine Sioux. And then we went to Shoto, which is, it's on the eastern slope of the Rockies, kind of central, about 50 miles from Great Falls. And it's, you drive a little bit up 40 miles north and you get to Browning, the Blackfeet Reservation, and then you get to Glacier Park, if that's familiar to you. If any of you are interested at all in powwows, you could put on your bucket list to go to Browning in July, because all of these nations gather there for a full week, and you will see all of the regalia. The powwows go day and night. It's really, really worth the trip to see. And to me, and this is the same feeling I had after meeting Jay Oldmouse, is that I feel like we have a rich tradition of music, but this tradition is deeper, much, much deeper, and to these people, to the Indians. And I think it's something that I can never experience, but I can, learn about it. But to have that as part of your makeup, I think it's something. Thank you all for listening.